This is the seventh module of the course in applied linguistics of e-Pathshala, the program in linguistics. We have already covered six modules. The seventh module sort of very briefly examines the question of the relationship between language, the human mind, the psychological processes, the physiological processes in the human mind, or you might say the general cognitive faculties. Forget about language for the time being. We have certain general cognitive faculties. We reason, we observe things, and we feel. There are various cognitive abilities to infer. We look at the clouds and we think it might rain, and so on. So the various cognitive abilities that one is gifted with. So we would like to ask the question, what is the relationship between language, human mind and cognition? And how is what are the different positions people have taken regarding language in terms of cognition and the human mind. So how do we learn language? Mediated by cognition and the human mind. And how do we process this data? This noise, as we said, this is noise, right? And how do we manage to process this noise and convert this into a highly complex grammatical system which never goes wrong? You see, the interesting thing about the linguistic competence is that a 4-year-old child can correct a foreigner trying to learn a language, trying to learn her language. If, for example, a foreigner walks into her house, she's 4 or she's 5, and he says, Mohan seb khati hai. So this 5-year-old child is going to laugh. She will think, my God, this such a big person, such a tall person, he doesn't even know that Mohan cannot be khati. Mohan has to be khata. So because how can she laugh? How can she? It's not that she can tell the rule, no, but she's aware, she's conscious that this is a mistake. And the only way that she can be conscious about this is simply through having internalized that rule that the subject must agree in person and number and gender. We call this PNG, like CNG. So person, number, gender. Generally in Hindi, the PNG of the subject will be copied onto the verb. So we do these things. So how do we acquire all this? What? So there are generally three major positions that are held in this respect. The one of them is called behaviorist, and we'll talk about it. The other one is called constructivist, and finally you have the nativist. These are three major positions. So let me start talking about the behaviorist position, which was very dominant, as you will read in your module, during the sort of 19th century, almost whole of 19th century to the middle of the 20th century. And actually, in many ways, we are going back to behaviorism in many respects, but to a different kind of behaviorism. Let me explain to you what I mean when I say behaviorism. Behaviorism, in a very sort of rough way, a very quick kind of understanding of behaviorism means that nothing exists outside the world of the observable and the measurable. More or less saying that all learning must take place in terms of stimulus and response. And we get, if you think of the human mind, and if you think of the environment, and if you say that all learning of any kind, all knowledge systems of any kind All language of any kind must be learned through an interaction between the human mind and the environment. And when I say environment, I include everything: parents, families, forests, gardens, everything. Teachers, schools, everything is included there. Now, the behaviorist position would maintain uh, at a sort of more or less fundamental level that the human mind is blank and everything is acquired, everything is learned through a stimulus response process from the environment. It provides you a stimulus through your senses, through five senses, and if I say something correct, you give me a toffee or a chocolate, you give me a reward, and I learn. That's how learning takes place. So this is behaviorism, very, very broadly speaking. This is what a behaviorist position says. And as I said, during the 19th century, people like Watson, Pavlov, Thorndike, Guthrie, Skinner, and a whole lot of others dominated the scene of psychology and of knowledge construction and of language learning, because they sort of insisted that everything has to be acquired through the environment, through what is observable and what is measurable, what you can feel, what you can see, what you can hear, what you can touch. Okay, that is what is the source of learning. And everybody thought, yeah, that looks perfect. That makes perfect sense. And Pavlov, for example, gave the theory of classical conditioning, and Skinner gave us the theory of operant conditioning. The central to these conditioning were three or four things. One, stimulus, that you give a certain kind of stimulus. Then you go through a sort of a regimentation of practice and drill. So you do a lot of practice and a lot of drill and a lot of repetition. And then if the response to that stimulus becomes an automatic habit, then you are rewarded and you are said to have learned something. Okay. For example, you give me a stimulus of saying that, okay, this is a mobile phone, and you say mobile, and I say mobile, and then you say, mobile, you're saying mobile, very good. So that much drill, perfect. You have now learned the word mobile. Okay, so that is how learning was said to take place. So the role of reward, and if I did not learn, I could be punished. So that day I will not get food, or I'll not get my chocolate. Okay, things of that sort. And so stimulus and response and the conditioning of one kind of stimulus with one kind of response, they're matching. And reward, punishment, practice and drill, they were central to behaviorist habit formation, and automatic habit formation was called learning. So this is what, and they regarded language as making habits automatic. You see something, you see a rose, and you say rose. You're very happy. And you see on your screen this slide. You will see on your screen, which is a very sort of famous and oft quoted screen called Pavlov's dog. Very often we say we are behaving like a Pavlov's dog. The moment you see something, you will always say like this. The moment I say something, you will do this. So you're like Pavlov's dog. And what happened in the case of Pavlov's dog was that Pavlov took a dog and he said, look, if I can train this dog and show something, as you can see on your slide, if this dog can learn something, certainly the human beings can similarly be trained to acquire knowledge, to learn things. So he took the dog and he presented the dog. He rang a bell near the dog, and there was, of course, no response. The dog did the normal sort of unconditioned kind of response, in the sense the ears turned, and his head moved towards the bell, but nothing more happened. There was no salivation. There was no saliva coming out of the mouth of the dog. Nothing happened. So the bell did not respond. The ringing of the bell did not produce the kind of response that Pavlov thought he will teach the dog. So the dog, as is shown on your screen, went through a period of training. So what happened during the training? You remember? Practice and drill, repetition. What happened was that you again rang the bell, but this time the bell ringing was there with the meat powder. There was some meat also. Meat powder was there and the bell was ringing. So the moment the dog heard the bell and also noticed or tasted the meat powder, there was saliva. Okay. So, and then after the training period, after a lot of this kind, now the bell had become the conditioned stimulus and meat powder was the unconditioned stimulus, and the salivation had earlier become unconditioned response. Now, if Pavlov could teach the conditioned response to the dog, then learning has taken place for Pavlov. So what has happened is, now the bell rang, just the bell, and the dog salivated. Of course, we know it will not continue salivating if it didn't get the meat powder again after 2 or 3 days. Okay, but this is what behaviorism meant for people like Pavlov, Skinner, Thorndike, and many others, with minor variations, lot of improvement, but this is what it essentially meant. I hope I have made that clear, that what is behaviorism and what is so what Pavlov did was called classical conditioning. Okay, the conditioning of the dog to the ringing of the bell and producing saliva. Okay, that's what the story was. And this was happening in 1950s, and in 1957 Skinner wrote a book called Verbal Behavior in the 1950s, sometime 1952 or 55, I think. 55. No, in 1957. Skinner wrote a book called Verbal Behavior, and he thought he had explained how verbal behavior is acquired. And in 1959, Chomsky wrote a review of Skinner's book, which is considered to be a landmark. It was published in the most prestigious linguistic journal called Language, and it simply destroyed behaviorism in one stroke. Chomsky basically was saying that the human linguistic system could not be explained in terms of a stimulus, response, and conditioning theory. Languages are not learned through practice and drill and through imitation. Languages are learned in something in a very different way. And he said, look, if you look at a painting, the famous example from Chomsky's review of Skinner, that if there's a painting on the wall, and if 10, it's the same painting, it's the same stimulus, expected to produce the same kind of response, but it doesn't. So if there are 10 people see the painting, there will be 10 different responses. Some people might say, oh, this is where we went for the holiday. Oh, this is so pretty. Oh, the colors are right. Okay. Oh, the painting is a bit tilted. It should be put straight. I have never seen a painting better than, I mean, the infinite number of responses the same stimulus can lead to. Skinner did similar experiments with rats. The difference between Pavlov and Skinner, as you will read in your module, was that in the case of Skinner, the organism could work on the environment, like the rat in the box had to struggle to find a piece of bread or a piece of meat, to press a lever so that it will get a piece of meat. So, and it was called operant conditioning because the organism was working on the environment and then learning something. But the theory of reinforcers and punishers and rewards were the same, whether it was Thorndike, as you will read in your module, Thorndike talked of satisfier and annoyers in the same way. Things that you succeed in, you are satisfied and you learn. Things that annoy you, they are annoyers, and that you don't learn them. So, different behavioristic things have to be done in order to ensure learning in the behaviorist kind of paradigm. So, the learning, the kind of human learning could not be explained in terms of behaviorist paradigm. Chomsky made it clear, and even Piaget's work, who has been, and later Vygotsky's work, who have been probably the most influential names in the world of education. Piaget said, yes, it is not that we are empty. We are born with some basic cognitive mechanism, and that mechanism takes us through some stages. The first thing that we learn as children is to externalize that X is there even when X is not there. You must have noticed that in the beginning, when the father goes away, the child does not cry in the first year. Or if you hide her toy, then the child doesn't cry. It doesn't look for the toy. It forgets. But after 1 year or 1.5 years, the child begins cry when the father goes away, because she has figured out that the father is there even when the father is not there, or the toy is there even when the toy is not there. So that is the first step towards the construction of knowledge, is externalization. And then Piaget explained the processes of assimilation and accommodation, that you form certain concepts in the mind, and if you see a similar concept, if you see a similar object or a similar phenomena, you assimilate that into the category, or you accommodate it, you modify the category. I mean, this is very common. There is a stage in which all children will go through a stage where they call all animals cow or dog, for example. But then they notice that the bigger thing is not called a dog, but it's called a cow. So modifies the category and then creates probably the super category of animals, but within that creates the category of dogs and cows and buffaloes and cats and so on. And Piaget also said that all of us go through different stages of cognitive growth, and they are more or less, the age might vary, but the stages don't vary. As you will see in the module, the sensory motor stage, the pre-operational stage, and the concrete operational stage, and finally to get to the formal operational stage. Now, the sensory motor stage, pre-operational stage, are the kind of things that you do before you get 5 years, 6 years. You are not into concrete things, and you cannot appreciate how concrete things work. Like, you cannot count stones in the pre-operational stage. You cannot match the numbers, with the or you have no conservation of liquid, for example. You have no conservation of numbers, for example. The standard experiment in Piaget that is done is that you keep 7 coins like this, and you keep 7 coins in the other, and you ask the child which one has more. So the one line that is spread out, the child would say it has more coins than the line of coins which is narrow. Okay, but both have 7. But soon in the concrete operational stage, the child figures out gradually that there has to be a 1-to-1 correspondence, and whether you spread them or put them narrowly, they are both 7. So this was a Piagetian perspective, which is called constructivist perspective. That okay, you have certain cognitive mechanisms, you're born with them, very basic, but then the rest of the things you have to acquire by working on the environment. And his theory has been called constructivist interactionism. That is what Piaget's theory has been called. The issue with this is that the formal operational stage, which will come after the age of 12 or 13, where the child can figure out that A plus B is equal to B plus A, in language already has happened by the age of 4 or by the age of 3.5. So that is the biggest problem that, that was the biggest debate between Piaget and Chomsky. That how come such complex formal operations are acquired or internalized by children before the age or before the Piagetian stage of formal operations. So that is the basic question that Chomsky had for both the behaviorists and for the constructivists, constructivist interactionists. That is the basic question. So the third position, so the second position, along with Piaget and later on with more cognitivists who agreed that there was more to the human mind than Pavlov, Skinner, Thorndike, Piaget, Vygotsky thought. There was more. There are two sort of categories that either you have general cognitive abilities which account for language acquisition. So as you will see on your module, many people believe even today in that kind of situation that yes, human mind has some innate faculties, some innate mechanisms which account for all learning, but also for language learning. Okay, so that was the kind of position. But as opposed to this, Chomsky and other nativists who believe in an innate language faculty, they believe that the role of the environment in language acquisition is only of a trigger, of nothing more. The rest of the language blueprint is already there in the human mind. It's already in place. We are born with it, just as we are born with the ability to see, with the ability to breathe, with the ability to walk. We are born. We are born with the ability to talk, to acquire speech. Not only that we have the vocal tract, but we have the human brain, which has the universal language footprint already inscribed there. Notice that people will say, what about the blind? What about the hearing impaired? What about people with various disabilities? So let me tell you that whatever be the level of disability, language is one thing that everybody is gifted with, except for a minor, minuscule people who are highly cognitively damaged or cognitively deficit. They may lack in language. Blind people don't. Hearing impaired people don't. People call them deaf and dumb. They are neither deaf nor dumb. They can't hear, but they have their own language, which is called sign language. So sign language is not a matter of signs like this or come. No. Sign language is a full-blown language with its own grammar and lexicon. Okay. So that was Chomsky's position, that we have innate language faculty, and it is distinct from any other cognitive faculty. That first of all, human mind is not empty, and the complexity and richness of language shows, and the early years, say maximum by 3 years or 4 years, the speed at which, what we have earlier called Plato's problem, how come given so little children acquire so much? in terms of language and only language. So Chomsky's position was that we must be gifted with a unique language faculty in addition to other language faculty, because there are many people. For example, have a if you ever run into a book called The Mind of a Savant, Savant, uh, you will find uh, that a student, that a child who could not do anything cognitively, he could not tie shoelaces, but he learned several languages, maybe 10, maybe 12. He learned several languages. So the argument is that we must be gifted with innate, distinct language faculty. After that, yes, there are hundreds of social factors, psychological factors, in intake, lot of input that is needed for it to become intake. As we said earlier, there are teachers, there are books, all these things are important. But we have to recognize as a distinct position that language must be innately given. Language faculty must be innate to human beings. Thank you very much. I hope we have understood the behaviorist, the general cognitivist, and the innatist position in this module.